So we're on chapter 21 of book one, page 49, if you're in this little book here. And the chapter is on the compunction of heart. The compunction of heart, that's how the heart feels when it's done something wrong. That sense of kind of just discomfort or guilt or whatever that sensation you have. It's probably fairly individual, but just that kind of sick at heart sort of feeling of like, oh. So he's been talking about that and about dealing with our sin. And, we were talking last week about the difference in the tone of the writing in this particular book. And actually in a lot of Christian literature and scripture, that tone is often there. And, I often it's viewed as a negative thing because it makes you feel strange. It makes you feel guilty or in trouble or in danger or something like that. And I've been thinking about that quite a bit this week. And I've determined that that might be one of the reasons that Vivekananda liked this book so much. They like to carry it with him because I don't think it's invalid to feel that way. It's not pleasant to feel that way. It's not something we seek after for sure. But I think it's healthy to kind of mix a little bit of uh, that more difficult language, that more stern father-like admonition to living a right life, because there's times when we need that. That there's lots of times in our life where we get just a wee bit casual. At least in my life, of course, that's all I can reference. But where I get kind of casual about, getting up on time or doing my practice, or not watching something that's not helpful to my mental health on YouTube, or something. And it's easy to fall in to, especially when you take on the philosophy of reincarnation, where it's like, hell isn't sitting there waiting with the crackling wood to welcome you upon your waking from your dying. And the thing about all of that is it gives you a lot of impetus to do your work, to grow, to pay attention, to have some sense of urgency about what you're doing. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that they had to engineer the idea of an eternal hell in order to cultivate to cultivate some motivation in folks. And so I don't buy into that, and I actually don't even buy into the idea of hell being a Christian doctrine. I think it might be a church doctrine, but I don't think it's one of the Christian doctrines. You just don't see that talk by the Christ anyway. And so this notion of hell is going to come up in some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. And I don't think it's necessary to have a hell after you die. I think that if you're living that kind of life, hell is formed here for you. From my own experience, I know this. I mean, I can tell you quite straightforwardly, that there was a time in my life where I was driven to the edge of wanting to die just because of enjoyment. Just because my life had become so much about enjoyment that I was so isolated and so exhausted by the constant need to be completely distracted at all times. I remember there was a time in my 20s and early 30s where if I had a night that didn't have plans, I would panic almost, because if I spent that time alone with no distraction, I felt such a deep sense of depression, such a deep sense of meaninglessness, because I really remember thinking to myself at the time when I started to awaken inside to search for something deeper, something with more meaning in life, or for any meaning in life. I remember understanding that at that point in my life, I was just a parasite that ate enjoyment, that sucked enjoyment out of the planet. And that was the whole point of my life. I went to work to get the money to spend on enjoyments, and I went to the gym to get the body that could entertain my enjoyments. And my plans, my friends were the people I enjoyed, that I wanted to be around. Uh, if you live a life like that, even if everything's going fine, because from the outside, you would have looked at me and thought, wow, he's got a great life. I had everything that I needed. I had more than I needed. I was traveling. I had a nice house. I had everything was perfect. But inside, I was just dead. I was just utterly broken. And I remember walking up the hill that night from the clubs and just thinking to myself, my God, what I'm not going to be able to sustain this. I had the image of myself as an old man, trying to stumble up that same hill after being at the club for the night. And I was like, that's not going to happen. And it occurred to me, I thought, what am I investing in for my old age? And that's always been a real measure for me of my spiritual life is that it's like, I remember laying in my bed in the monastery in Hollywood and laying there and thinking, what if this was my deathbed? What if I wasn't going to be getting up in 15 minutes and going to the shrine? What if I couldn't get up? What if this is where I was going to be all day for the foreseeable future, and maybe even for a very short future? And I really try to heavily imagine and put that into place and think, have I found, have I created, have I touched an inner world that can carry me through contentment in an old folks home, or on my deathbed in a single room? Have I done the interior work that can allow me to be at peace and content with nothing, with nothing, literally nothing? And I think it's a wonderful thing for us to think about every now and then. Well, have you cultivated an inner life that doesn't need the outer life? That doesn't require someone to come and entertain you, or that's X number of people are asking how you are, or that you're going to go outside and see the sun at some point today. Because I've definitely seen a large number of people who, for the weeks and months before they die, can't enjoy anything. And that's always been a measure of my practice for me. It's like, do I know God? That's the real bottom line. Do I know God, and can I enjoy God uh, with a body that doesn't work, and maybe with a mind that doesn't work, that's just laying there? All right. So somehow that was an introduction. Now we're going to change the topic, jump in to our first verse here. And we read the first paragraph of number 4. And we pick up with good people. Good people always find enough reason to have sorrow and to weep. Right? And he's saying anybody who does discernment, anybody who's working on their spiritual life, has plenty of opportunity to know our faults, right? They're right there as soon as we sit down and try and do anything. The faults are right there. He says, for whether they look at themselves or think about their neighbors, they realize that no one lives in this world free from affliction, right? That there is, well, I think part of the problem is that sometimes we believe there are people out there that aren't living with affliction. We always wonder, why is that person so, have such a cushy life when they're such a nasty person, but I think about that. It's like, you could have looked at, if a Christian had looked at my life in the 90s, they would have seen a happy face. They would have seen somebody who was, always trying to be really bubbly and happy and funny and witty and enjoying every situation. And they would think, my God, how does a man with that kind of life, how does that man, why is everything so good for him? How come I'm the one suffering? But the fact is, if they had followed me home and seen me sitting on my bed as I was getting prepared to lay down, they would have seen the real me, the real me that was like, oh my God, what is this about? Where is life going? So we can always find, plenty of uh, signs of affliction in the world. And those people that we think are doing so great may not be doing so great behind the mask, behind the play, when they're home alone. And so it's just this knowing that it's everywhere. They realize that no one lives in this world free from affliction. And the more thoroughly they look into their own hearts, the deeper will be their sorrow. But the cause for real grief and contrition is the remembrance of our sin, in which we are so enmeshed that we can hardly think about our spiritual matters. And actually, reading this earlier is what gave me that notion of that it's not such a bad thing to have this stern voice at times. Because truly, we suffer because of our wrong thinking. Well, whenever I see the word sin, I just replace it with with those two words, wrong thinking or wrong action or unhelpful action. Because St. Paul actually says something very interesting in the New Testament. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful, right? So he really makes it clear there. It's not about rules. Everything is lawful. We're free, but not everything is helpful to us. And so that's when you think of sin, or when they talk about sin, instead of taking on traditional ideas of it, just think of it in that way. Things that are unhelpful toward realization, toward being spiritual, toward manifesting love and manifesting wisdom. And he says, if we're honest with ourselves, that's going to be there because we're deeply entrenched in our wrong thinking. And that wrong thinking includes being a body, being a mind, being a personality, loving all of the conditions of being those things, loving the control that we have, or seeming control that we have in our life. All these things they fall in the category of sin, of unhelpful beliefs, unhelpful ideas, unhelpful actions. And we do pay a very heavy price for them. But because the world is relative, we get accustomed to paying that price, and it doesn't have the effect on us anymore, which is why I think this kind of language is appropriate for someone who's grown dull, for someone who has kind of gotten very lax in their spiritual life and just kind of fallen into a groove. And and have gotten that attitude of like, well, if I don't do it in this life, I'll do it in my next life. And Ramakrishna despised, even Ramakrishna, who is the most gracious of any spiritual teacher I've ever known. Even he, says, "Oh, I spit on that Vedanta." It's like, no. What is this casual attitude about your realization? No, you should be on fire. You should be just thoroughly committed to this ideal. You should strive with all of your heart, with all of your mind, all of your strength, all of your soul to realize these things. And so sometimes we need to have a little bit of a fire set under us. And so when we take account of our life, when we go inside and we see our faults, we shouldn't just pamper ourselves. We shouldn't just cover them in grace and put lots of butter on them and think they're not so bad. We should measure them and see and blame them. Say, look, because you do that, you suffer. Because you do that, you're caught in desire. Because you do that, mother can't reach that person through you. Because you have those habits and those weaknesses, mother can't trust you to put you in touch with those people who need help, that she wants to give a hug to, give a reach to. It's like to look at it, try and see it very clearly, so that's part of discernment. And so when these things are presented in this harsh light, take that chastisement without becoming discouraged. Take that chastisement without taking on the identity of a sinner, right? Because at the end of the day, we are not. We are the image of God. We are ever free and ever pure and ever beloved. That's the ultimate truth. So we won't buy on the part about a sinful nature and that man is sinful and whatnot like that. We won't take that on because that's not accurate even in the Christian scripture. That's just a bad habit of manipulative thinking. So when we hear this chastisement, be chastised. Understand that. But just don't identify with that feeling. Don't identify and define yourself by your faults. That's the only thing to be careful of. Just don't hear about sin. Know that there's things in our life that are wrong, that need to be taken care of, that are serious, that need to have a serious attitude, and that we probably should be chastised for, pinned to the wall a little bit about them. But even in the middle of that pinning, don't identify yourself with the fault. understand that as soon as you get shaken up a little bit, that will fall out and you'll be fine. You'll move beyond that. Because the bottom line there, the very last line of verse 4, he says the real reason why is because it's because of our sin, because of our wrong thinking, our unhelpful thinking, that we can hardly think about spiritual matters. We can hardly focus on God at all when we sit down to do our meditation. The mind is bouncing off the wall like a rubber ball, and that is the price of indulging in unhelpful living, unhealthy living in that sense. If you think more often about death than of a long life, you would be more eager to amend your life, right? Especially within the Christian context of judgment, where God's going to pick up that list and see who's naughty and who's nice, but this idea of death, even for a Vedantist, it's a judgment. It is a judgment period, because you get judged as to whether or not you're going to come back to this life again, and at what level you're going to come back to this life again, or whether you're going to go on to some loka, or whether you're going to find freedom, liberation, moksha. That's all judgment. But, I've always understood in my own mind, had this understanding that it's not a God that's going to judge you. It's you that's going to choose based on your condition, right? If you like the way I've often shared that I like to think about this is that near-death experience where people said they're walking down a tunnel toward this beautiful bright light. I've always imagined that bright light is the light of divine presence, and it goes through anything. There's no hiding anything from it, and you're going to walk stark naked down that tunnel toward this bright, all-revealing light. And if you have become well-versed in grace, if you have clung to the Divine Mother's feet, then you can walk right into that light, which is moksha, right? But if you look to the left or right, even in a glance, for something to protect you or something to hide you or something to cover your faults or feel that shame, whatever you look to for refuge will be your next birth. It will be you that could not walk into the light. It will be you that felt the need to cover and shame something about yourself. And so it's you that does your own judgment. It's you that will determine your next birth by the trajectory that you're on at that moment you take your last breath. Whatever you leave this world with, in the direction you were going, that's the direction you'll keep going. And so thinking of death will keep you aware of that and keep you checking and doing inventory of that internal world. Like, what am I doing? Do I really love? Am I really trying? Am I really concerned about these things? Or am I trying to do the things that I know I could do better? And so to have that, Ramakrishna gives an example of that every day. He said every day, at the end of the day, he would lay on the ground at Dakshineshwar, rolling in the dirt, saying, "Mother, what is this? Another day has passed in vain, and I still have not seen your face." Right? He took every single day. He took account. How did my day go? Did I seek God? If someone looked at my life today, God forbid I'm going to say this, but if someone takes a look at my life for today, would they look at that and say, wow, look, that guy loves the Lord with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength? Or, wow, look at that guy. He wants one thing, and that's a spiritual freedom. Would they look at me and say, wow, look, that guy is so loving. He's so compassionate. What do people see? And it's only in as far as giving me a perspective on whether I'm doing the deed, whether I'm walking the walk or not. And so it's a good thing to do that. It's not a good thing to be stressed out by it or to get worked up over it, but it's a great thing to be honest about it and to take the next step with a certain amount of zeal and a certain amount of joy, because you're allowed and given another opportunity, another day. If you thought seriously about the pains of hell or purgatory, you would gladly endure pain and labor, and no hardship would seem too much for you, right? So even this pains of hell are possible for us to reach. It's not a forever thing from the Vedantic perspective, and I don't think it's a forever thing from the Christian perspective, because it would be so ungodlike. It would just be so ungodlike how a God of love would create a permanent torture room, uh, and at the same time claim to be infinitely merciful, infinitely just, and infinitely loving. It just can't possibly be, you see. It just simply cannot be. And so, yes, hell is there, but it's the hell that we create. It's the hell that I created for myself, with all of my enjoyment. It just hollows us out as a human being. It takes away our zest for life. It literally puts you in a place where you would rather be dead. I can remember thinking that, like, almost like a mantra at points in my life, like, oh God, oh, just kill me. you know, this terrible thing. And this is the hell. So if you remember the results of your actions, when you make wrong decisions, remember how it feels. Remember its effect on you. That's what he's talking about here. Is think about those things. Be honestly discerning. If you've hurt somebody, see how you've hurt them. It's like I share that time with again, I share it. That time when I was a very naughty boy when I first joined the monastery in that first year, and how when I went and told Swami Prabhutananda about what I had done, how he made me repeat it 3 times, each time asking different sets of questions, so that I had to stand there, metaphorically completely exposed in front of him. And boy, did that work. Man, that broke my heart open. Oh my God, I saw very clearly what my future would be in that life, in that direction. And that was all that was necessary. Here it is, it's been 25 years now, and I can still very clearly say to you, I don't want to go through that again for any reason. don't want to do that again. And so have this level of honesty. That's what Prabhutananda said to me that day. He says, your honesty has saved you. Go to the shrine. And so I went to the shrine. And so it's that this is what confession is about. Even though we don't have a formalized practice of it in Vedanta, we should always be open with each other about the way that we really are. We should never be content with looking like the ideal, while we're around others. We should know that what we do when no one else is around, that's the thing that we're earnest and sincere about. So we should know that, and we should be careful about that, and we should take note and say, wow, that's not really the thing I want to be earnest about. That's not really what I want my life to be about, right? So we take that into account. There was a Swami, the reason that came to mind, there was a Swami one time, someone asked him, well, how do we know if we're earnest and sincere? What does that look like? And the Swami answered, he said, you're earnest and sincere about the thing that you do when no one else is looking. Are you what are you doing when you don't have to be doing anything else and no one is around to keep you accountable? Are you sincere about God? Are you earnest about knowing God? Is that what you choose to do in your free, unwatched time? So it's a good marker. It's a good marker, and it hurts. I have to say, those thoughts hurt, and that's exactly the point. It wakes us up to the pain that we're subjecting ourselves to all the time, right? That story of Brigu, when she comes and touches Thakur's feet, and it makes Thakur sting like a scorpion, like he was stung by a scorpion. And I wondered about that for so long, because I thought certainly many unclean people had touched Thakur, and he hadn't gone running and panting looking for a jar of of Ganga water. And why would he ever do that to that poor woman? And you see, I thought I looked at it from that Vedantic perspective. Thakur is that woman. He is her highest ideal. He is what her soul is when it's free. And he was showing her through the external world what her actions are actually doing to her own self, what her impurities are actually doing to her own self, that she is stinging her own soul like a scorpion with her impurities, with her life. And I think that that's why he did that, to shock her into a realization that it's not okay. You're not okay for your own sake. You're not okay uh, where you're at. Take it up a notch, as it were. So if you thought seriously about the pains of hell or purgatory, you would gladly endure pain and labor, and no hardship would seem too much for you. But since these things do not penetrate the heart, and we still love the false pleasures of this world, we tend to be cold and indifferent. It is this weakness of the spirit that often makes our wretched bodies complain for the slightest reason. Therefore, and here's the instruction, humbly pray to God, right? And how do we get that humility? By honesty and by hiding nothing when we sit in our prayer. Humbly pray to God that in his merciful goodness, right? So that's our focus. Our focus is not just on what we've done wrong or how lousy we may have been today. But when we pray, when we humbly pray to God, those things are there, but we're opening our heart to him and we're keeping our eye on his merciful goodness. He will give you the spirit of penance. And in the words of the prophet, say to him, feed me, O Lord, with the bread of tears, and give me tears to drink beyond measure. Help me see the truth. Help me find the inspiration and the motivation to battle my bad habits that I've been carrying with me for a whole life. Help me, because of your goodness and because of your mercy, because of your grace, because you are perfect love. Let me learn perfect love. Let me see it. Let me know what it's like to experience it. Because just one touch from the beloved, just one touch, and you'll be dancing around in circles for the rest of your life, trying to longing for that touch again. All right. Chapter 22. On the consideration of human misery. You are wretched wherever you are, and no matter which way you turn, unless your turning is to God. Why are you easily upset just because things do not go your way? Right? So there is no place to find solace, real comfort in this world except the divine. Right? That's why he's our only refuge. We've said a number of times, the only comfort you can get in this world is distraction. All of your forms of pleasure, all of your forms of vice, the only benefit that they give to you is for a few moments they can distract you from your pain. But when the enjoyment is over, when the pleasure has ceased, you're right back where you were. And even in a worse state, you feel even less good about yourself in that perspective. And this is why God is the only refuge, because it's only in the presence of God that, one, we don't get to be distracted. We don't get to fall out of awareness. We have to, by the very nature of God, be in awareness, which is a state of real honesty, state of real open honesty. And in the glare of that awareness, things are made right. You're not distracted. You're not just distracted for a few minutes. You're fixed. Through sometimes through pain. Sometimes as you sit there feeling guilty and you just keep your eyes on it, you don't let go of it. You're like, you hold it before the Lord. That fixes you. That straightens what is bent. And so this understanding, humbly pray to God always. You are wretched wherever you are, and no matter which way you turn, unless your turning is to God. Why are you easily upset just because things do not go your way? Who is there that gets his or her own way all the time? Neither you, nor I, nor anybody. For there is no one in this world without trouble, no one without difficulties, whether that person is a king or the pope. Who is best off? Only the one who is willing to suffer something for the love of God. Only someone who, one, knows of the love of God, has an ideal, carries an ideal of perfect love, of perfect wisdom, perfect existence, and only one who is willing to suffer, who's willing to renounce, who's willing to give up their treasured ignorances, which is really hard to believe when you put it in those words. Oh, I don't love my ignorance. Well, I'm afraid you do. Right? We do. We won't let go of these things. And some of these things, the deepest things about us, we won't even look at. We won't even consider. We won't even consider them. The eyes will kind of just bump right over them as we're looking through ourselves. And this is how we know, these things that we do again and again, they're not willing to let go of. The only one who is best off is the one who is willing to suffer, to suffer something for the love of God. You're willing to do the work. You're willing to do the renunciation. You're willing to do the self-control. You're willing to clean out the house, clean out the mind, to do some austerities, to strengthen your willpower, to spend some time studying scripture and chanting the name of God so that you can lift your mind out of its favorite little backwaters, as it were. But there are many spiritually weak people who say to themselves, look at what a nice life these people lead. They are rich and they are powerful. They are highly regarded by others and hold good positions in life. Yet, if you look at the rewards of heaven, you will see how little these earthly things count. In fact, they can become a burden, for they require constant care, and you never know when you may lose them. Right? This is Thakur right here. This is how he teaches us discernment in this world. There's only one thing you have to know in this world to renounce, and that is everything has an expiration date. Everything passes. Nothing lasts. And just remembering that constantly by itself will lead you to freedom, will lead you to moksha. Right? The whole idea of potting soil. There's nothing in this world to have and to own but potting soil in all of its different forms. But at the end of the day, potting soil. So whatever it is that's grabbing you, today I watched a little YouTube video on the new iMac M3, and I felt that little taste in the back of my mouth, like, no, that's a beautiful machine. I could use that, right? And then I remember, well, what about the M1 that you were doing that 2 years ago? And what about the Mac Plus back when it weighed 45 pounds that you were longing for? Where does all this longing take you? It's endless. It's a treadmill, right? That's discernment. So when you feel those desires tickle the back of your mind, immediately ask yourself those important questions. Have I done this before? Have I longed for this before? Have I gotten that desire fulfilled? How was it? And how come I'm right in the same place now that I was, 25 years ago? If that was fulfilling, if that gave me anything in my life, why? And so always discern. This is, the rich. You never know when you can lose it all. We're sort of watching that with poor Mr. Trump at this point in his life, riding that big wave, untouchable. And suddenly, eventually it catches you. Now, we don't know to what extent yet, but it's not looking pretty by any means, right? And so we should learn this is the nature of the world. This world, nothing lasts. There's nothing here to be taken or gained or gotten, right? You came in naked, you're going to go out naked. Might as well stay naked in between. You didn't hear it from me. but this notion, don't live a life of gaining and grabbing. and certainly don't lead a spiritual life trying to gain or grab, right? Spiritual life is surrender. It's setting down things that fall away of their own accord. Our happiness does not consist in many possessions. Definitely, we know that, right? And that's really, if you're going after money, that's, you've already, in college, in college, you already own everything that money can buy. You already own a scooter to get around campus on. You already own a jam box to listen to your music. You already own a little 10-inch television to watch your shows on. You already have a bed. You already have a room to keep you out of the rain. That's all that money will ever buy you the rest of your life. The only thing it's going to change is the size of those things or the numbers of those things. But you're never going to be able to buy any more than that. That is all this world can sell to you. And so understand that, sit on the edge of your bed and look around and think, do I have anything really different than I had in my first year of working? Is there really anything here? It's just shelter. It's just a bed. It's just food. It's just a television, just a stereo. That's all it does. I've shared that. I went out, for years in my early day, I'd go to Union Square, and they had the Bang & Olufsen store there on Union Square. Now, first of all, Union Square is hanky-panky already. It's, upscale. And there in that glass front store, they had the Bang & Olufsen, which is a high-end audiophile stereo shop. And I mean, beautiful, sexy stereo stuff, in that window. Smoked glass that is hand sensitive. Even back 30 years ago, they were touch sensitive. And I remember just every time I'd be down there, I'd walk by that store and I would just look at the windows, and I'd go inside and I'd do the touchy thing to make the panels move. And I just, oh, what a great thing. And then when I finally got that job, that my first engineering job, first thing I did was go down there and spend that $3,200 on that stupid little all-in-one compact stereo system. And I remember the feeling because I was so excited. I was just, oh my God. And I just carried that box out, put it in the cab, got my ride back to my house, took that thing out. I had bought this wonderful, horribly tacky looking Corinthian column thing to set the new stereo on. And I set it all up there, got it all plugged in, and I put my CD in there for the first time. And I played that music, and I listened to the first song and then the second song, and then I was sort of bored. And I was like, wow, that's all it does. it just plays my CD, just like the jam box that I'm throwing out in the corner over there. That's all it does. Yeah, it looks great when it does it, but it still just does that. That's all. And even then, when I wasn't discerning much in life, I was still noticing the nature of the world, right? It doesn't take religion to teach you about the world. It takes attention and honesty to teach you about the world. That's all. Right? That's all. So our happiness does not consist in many possessions. Enough for our needs is sufficient. Our life on this earth is a trial, and the more spiritual we become, the more painful it is, for we better understand the defects of human corruption. Even to eat, drink, sleep, wake, rest, work, and care for other needs of the body brings misery to a devout person who longs to be rid of the bodily cares and the bondage of sin. Right? We begin to realize little by little in our spiritual life. Now, fortunately, we're not stuck like this. We do have that notion of transcendence in this life, of realization, that probably isn't in the mind of the writer of Christian literature, right? But that we can find moksha in this life. It is possible to do that. So we don't have to suffer to that degree. But certainly, the more aware you become of your true nature, certainly the more the longing for freedom, for transcendence arises in the heart. That's when you want nothing for God but God. You're panting for God at that point. For the spiritual person is weighed down by bodily necessities in this world. That is why the prophet longed to be freed from the necessities, praying, "From my necessities, set me free, O Lord." Right? From my necessities, set me free. Oops. And so just this bondage of having to, I remember when I was a kid, my mother, my big chore was to make my bed every morning. And I swear to you, for first 13 years of my life, every time I made that bed, I was like, why am I doing this? I'm just going to get back into it tonight. Why can't I just leave it the way it is? Right? So even there, I'm bemoaning my bondage, in this life. And I think that's the grace in old age. I truly, I insist that grace is the highest form. I mean, that old age is the highest manifestation of grace. Why? Because Mother is helping you in a wonderful, wonderful way to let go of this, right? This body, look at what she has to do to this body to get you to let go of it. My God. I've seen some of the old folks that have passed away. They're just sitting there. You're like, my Lord, what are they holding on to? This body completely melts and gets all kinds of deformity and all kinds of illness. Crazy stuff happens to your skin and your face and your eyes and what used to be your hair. All of this. And Mother is helping you to renounce. She's helping you to detach. She's showing you this has always been the nature of your body. Doesn't matter at what age you choose to look at, this has always been the nature of the body. It is passing, it is going, it is not you, and it is not yours. Let go, right? So all of old age is just that. Mother, one by one, removing, sometimes by force, all of your attachments so that you can prepare yourself for this chance of freedom, for realizing God when the body drops, right? But woe to them who do not realize their misery, right? Woe to the people who stay distracted, right? And certainly it is woe to those people. If you take that, the first time I smoked a cigarette, let me use that example. I was 8 years old, and me and my cousin snuck into my mom's purse and got one of her Kents out of her purse and went out to the backyard with the lighter. And she took a deep whiff of that cigarette, and then I took a deep whiff of that cigarette. I coughed my lungs out. I was asthmatic as a kid, and I went into an asthma attack. I was coughing so long that all the adults came running out because the two of us were hacking our guts out in the backyard. And Mother knew exactly what had happened. My mom was a little bit nicer to me because I was asthmatic and was clearly having an asthma attack because of it. So she just scolded me. But my cousin Heather, Aunt Barbara, made Heather smoke the rest of the pack to really drive home the point. Smoking is not what you want to do. And so we both got a lesson, right? That's discernment. That's understanding the nature. But woe to the person who doesn't learn, right? Woe to the person who doesn't learn. And immediately I think of my Aunt Johnny. When I was 14 years old, Aunt Johnny, I think it was about that time, Aunt Johnny was dying of emphysema because she was a smoker. And she came to visit, and she had to carry a bottle of, on this little wheeling device, she had to carry this bottle of oxygen that was always hooked up to her, those rubber tubes coming over her ears and going up into her nostrils. And I can remember sitting next, and she was my favorite aunt. And there I was sitting next to her on the couch in the living room, just kind of fascinated with the little thing going up her nose and her breathing. And it was still Aunt Johnny. And I wasn't thinking anything about it until she decided to light up a cigarette. She lit up a cigarette, and then she pulled the thing out of her nose and held it over her head and brought up the cigarette, took her smoke of the cigarette and put it down, and then plugged her oxygen back in. And I remember, even as a 14-year-old kid, I looked at that and I was like, what did I just watch? My Johnny, you're dying. You're dying because of that cigarette. and you're still taking the oxygen that you have to use because of smoking. You're taking that out of your nose to make room for a cigarette. And I just thought adults were the weirdest things in the world at that point. I was like, my God, adults are nuts. Who would ever, right? And so this is exactly what he's saying right here, right? When he says, but woe to them who do not realize their misery. Woe to them that are not willing to take a stern look and then willing to suffer for righteousness, willing to go through the work of quitting smoking, the pain and suffering of quitting smoking, so that they can be healthy. Woe to them who do not realize their misery, and still worse for those who love this miserable and corruptible life. For there are those who are so in love with it that even if they had to earn their living by hard labor or by begging, they would never want to leave it for the kingdom of God. Right? They're never going to let go of these things. Eventually they will. Nobody's that stubborn. Eventually they have to let go. That's the nature, that's the grace of Maya. Even in Maya, there's grace, because Maya allows us to hurt for ignorance. And at some point, all of us will wake up. That's what Thakur says. O foolish and senseless people who are so deeply entrenched in material things as to have no feeling or desire except for the pleasures of the flesh, when death comes, then they will realize how utterly worthless were the things they loved so much. Right? So there is that. There is that in the end, you are going to realize the nature of this universe. You are going to understand the nature of these things, and you'll let go of them, and you will find your moksha. But the holy saints, the faithful friends of Christ, did not cater to what gratified the flesh, nor to what was pleasing to the world. They set their sights and placed all their hope on eternal joys, for fear that loving visible things might draw them downward. For loving visible things, because visible things are unreal. They're simply symbols pointing at the divine reality. So the way to live in this world is to look through this world, right? Look at the mountains and say, oh, what beautiful mountains. And then look beyond the mountains and say, that beauty I know because the divine dwells within me. I can recognize beauty because of God, right? And so then our eyes go off of the mountains and to the beauty of the divine. So we look through this world at the divine behind it. We don't stop at the objects. We look through it. Oh, my brother or sister, do not lose your desire for spiritual progress while time and opportunity are still yours, right? Don't lose your desire for spiritual progress while time and opportunity still await you. Why do you delay any longer? Get up. Now is the time to begin. Say to yourself, now is the time for good works. Now is the time to fight. Now is the time to make reparation for the sins and mistakes of the past, right? What is that saying? Come to the moment. Come to the moment. Your spiritual life is happening now. Your relationship with the divine is happening now. Your moksha is available to you now. Your salvation, your freedom, now. Right? Understand that and live this moment knowing that. And don't. That's enough. Nothing really needs to be said. Do it now. Whatever you know you need to do it. There is no tomorrow. You're never guaranteed tomorrow, and my mind strays to my friend Gary. There is no tomorrow. At some point, this now will be all that you have. And that's your reality now. Right? Remember I told you I asked Swami Prabhupada what it was like to be 85 years old? just a few months before he died. And he looked at me and he just said, "Oh, it's the same as being 20. God has never promised you another day. Why did you assume you had one then? You don't have one even now." And so this is the whole point. Now is the time. You want to be a saint? Don't work on it for tomorrow. Be a saint. In this moment, be saintly. You want to love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength? Don't make a plan for getting there tomorrow. Love God right now with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You want to be pure? Be pure right now. You know, this is what he's trying to say. When you are troubled, that is the best time for you to merit. Yes, you must pass through fire and water before you come to the place of refreshment. Unless you gain full control of yourself, you will never overcome sin, and life will always be a burden because of the frailty of our nature. Right? Remember the pain of wrongdoing. Remember the pain of delusion. Remember the pain of ignorance. And use that to transform you now, in this moment. And especially when those things are confronting your mind, when your mind is tending toward pleasures, your mind is tending toward desires. At that time, it's time to pick this verse up and say, get up, now is the time, right, to overcome this. Don't fall even one more time to this trick. Now is the time. Be free of it now. Don't think that you're going to work up to it. Don't think, oh, grace covers me. It's just a small thing. We'll get over it in time. Right? These things that put us back to sleep again. These things that put us in a situation where we need somebody to nail us to the wall and say, hey, buddy, shape up. Get yourself together. Enough is enough. Right? Enough is enough. And that's what we're shooting for, is that understanding. All right.